Thanks for pressing play on another Dolphins podcast. We are less than 10 days away from the new year as the Miami Dolphins will start rebuilding their roster. We have players getting franchise tagged. We have meetings with soon-to-be pros in the NFL. But before we get into today's topics, 12 prospects who met with the Dolphins and how they might fit with Miami. Joshua Houtz, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, man. It seems like we're getting close. Like you said, the new league year's coming quicker than we expected, and Deebo Samuel got traded, right? So there's some moves being made, and who knows how that can impact the Miami Dolphins. So stoked to be able to come on here because, as we will talk about, the NFL Combine was last week, and there are a lot of players to get hyped about.
Deebo Samuel traded for a 5th-round pick. Obviously, his contract is so large. That is something you have to consider in a move like that. He is headed to Washington to become a commando. And Josh, right before we're getting on here, T. Higgins, he got tagged as the Bengals are getting ready to make Ja'Marr Chase the highest paid wide receiver in football. Any other? I don't think that we're really going to see any Dolphins getting tagged in the next week. Would you say so?
No, and I know today was Javon Holland's birthday. I think they kind of made up for his Valentine's Day. He was a little bit upset and butthurt, but they put out a nice little happy birthday post to him. But he'd probably be the only player I could see him maybe tagging or even have the thought of doing so. But what were your thoughts? I don't want to get too far out of spiral out of control here, but when you saw the Deebo Samuel 5th-round pick, I mean, that's got to be around what the Dolphins might get for a Tyreek Hill. I mean, did that make you change your mind in any way? Like, I was sitting there, I was pretty, set in my ways. I don't want him on my team. He's a cancer. You got to get rid of him. But a 5th-round pick, I saw that and I was like, damn, maybe I got to rethink my stance.
I think you can. Tyreek Hill is 1 year removed from nearly 2,000 yards. I mean, Deebo Samuel, and I don't want to discredit what he's done. I think he had a very down year last year. I think he underperformed when San Francisco's playoff run, especially in that Super Bowl as well. I think those are things you need to consider where I think there's an argument to be had that Tyreek Hill is still at the top of his game. I mean, what he was doing just as early as 2 years ago, Deebo Samuel, obviously a very versatile weapon. But Josh, I saw that. I thought, okay, you could do a 3rd for Tyreek Hill, but I think in life we all need to just have people who check us, right? Maybe not in a really slow your roll or stop in your tracks type of thing, but people who kind of just come out and say, "Are you sure you want to do that?" or really just make you think about your decisions. I went out to lunch with my dad, and he just kind of laid it out. He's like, after we were talking about the Deebo trades, like, I don't think you can trade Tyreek Hill. So Josh, we're sitting here 2 months after the outburst. And then he was very definitive with his statement because, I think he understood too, like, if you have a spot where you're 1-4, what's going to stop him from being that type of locker room noise again? And he didn't have an answer for that. And I think the point is we can't ignore how good of a player Tyreek Hill is. I think that as we're 2 months away, that was the message he's trying to send me. I wanted to get your thoughts there.
No, yeah. I mean, that's kind of where I'm leaning now. I saw that, and we knew we weren't going to get like a crazy pick. We were sitting there listing all the previous trades, but to see it come across the screen, and you're right, you're probably going to fetch a little bit more than a 5th for Tyreek Hill. But I mean, these guys, their backs against the wall. This offense needs a Tyreek Hill, or is much better with Tyreek Hill. So I feel like I've completely switched my stance, and I think he might be on the Dolphins. I'm a little more confident he's going to be on the Dolphins come week 1 than I might have been before.
Speaking of playmakers, let's go into it, Josh. 12 players that the Miami Dolphins met at the Combine. We're going to talk about players the Dolphins spoke with on the side and how they might fit with the Dolphins. And before we get too deep into this, I want to make it very clear. The Dolphins are not drafting every player they meet with. Some of these might even be smokescreens, which I really hope they aren't because that means Chris Grier, Mike McDaniel is just wasting everyone's time. I don't think that is the case, Josh. And to get us started here, one name jumped off the board to me. Running back Ollie Gordon II out of Oklahoma State. The Miami Dolphins as a franchise have used 2 third-round picks at running back. Gordon, he declared for the draft after his junior season. But Josh, I want to talk about his sophomore year. Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year after rushing for 1,732 yards. That's 6.1 yards per carry and 21 total touchdowns. His production dipped last season, averaging, quote-unquote, just 4.6 yards per carry for a struggling Oklahoma State Cowboys team that went 3-9. Josh, I don't see the Dolphins. Ashton Gentry would be so cool in a Dolphins uniform. I don't think the Dolphins are using a first-round pick on a running back. I don't know if there's going to be a running back available when the Dolphins are picking in the second. I think there's been about 3 guys who have it's been Gentry, Omarion Hampton, and I think there's a third player who his name's falling right on my ear right now. I cannot think of it to save my life, so you can chime in there. But somebody like Ollie Gordon, when you have a compensatory 3rd round pick, comp 4th round pick, this is someone, man, I get a little interested for explosive, but more than just his explosiveness, you're talking about someone who can carry 15 to 20 carry a game workload for the Dolphins.
Yeah, I think the other running back you're thinking of is Travion Henderson for
Yes.
Ohio State. So he's another guy that's up there who we've talked about. We really like him. But yeah, I mean, Mike McDaniel came out and said, we're going to bring in 2, maybe even 3 running backs this offseason. You mentioned it. They're probably not going to use that 13th pick on Ashton Genty if he's there. But I mean, again, stranger things have happened. But Ollie Gordon, I mean, they met with him, 6'2", 225 pounds. We love to have a thunder to a lightning. So I can definitely see, where there's value in this. And I think you touched on it best. I mean, I had to look up that this was the same player that coming into last year was highly, touted as one of the best, if not the best running back in the nation. So it's funny how those players can just have one bad year and how it affects their draft stock. So a good player met with the Dolphins, and I have no issue with him coming to Miami. And even if they get him, I mean, who's to say they're not going to bring an Acorn or a veteran or things like that? So completely revamped running back room. I just don't know how high of a pick you want to invest when you did already, trade up for Jalen Wright last year. But that's not my decision to make.
I wouldn't go higher than the 3rd. I know you already traded your own 3rd, so it'd be like an end of a 3rd round pick, which is basically a 4th rounder. That's probably as high as I would go. Another name that's Dolphins Twitter is starting to get a little interested in, Elijah Mitchell, soon to be free agent, former San Francisco 49ers running back. So just something to keep in mind. Josh, we made it 6 minutes before we're talking about offensive linemen. I want to start with Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State. This is an interesting prospect because he was actually asked to stay late. One of 5 linemen asked to stay late and do some snapping. People are kind of talking about him as one of the best centers in the draft, but I really like what he can do as a guard, and that's because he was an Associated Press first-team All-American tackle. Look at that. How not confusing is this when we just mentioned teams want him to play as center. He's likely to be a guard, even though he spent his entire career as a tackle. He ended his college career with 36 consecutive starts and has experience at every position outside of center. Again, I speak to that, Josh. It's kind of a unique to look at this process these teams go through with these prospects. But man, versatility, projected as like a 2nd round pick and only rising after a strong performance at the combine. I think he could be an interesting prospect for the Dolphins. 2nd round pick, Robert Hunt-esque maybe.
Yeah, that's kind of how it feels, right? And again, this was a guy who just last month at the Senior Bowl, he's doing one-on-one reps, like you mentioned, really impressed there. And then he was playing all over the offensive line. And I know that we always like to say versatility and how cliche that is, but we love Aaron Burr. We like what he does there at center, but we could absolutely use a guy that they could fall back on. Maybe there's some depth there. And then to have him be able to come in and play guard. So I don't know where he's going to go. Obviously, I think 13 is way too rich. Obviously, I think we both can agree on that. But I've read that he's a top 50 pick. And if the Dolphins can manage to swing this, whether it's to trade up in the 2nd round. We know there's always those good players available, and we always hope that they're the Dolphins, like the Dolphins, that team to move up there on day 2. I mean, I'd be all for it. So plugging and playing him into this offensive line, I think it'd be awesome to see how it would work out. I just think there's probably a lot of teams that have their eyes set on him as well.
Josh, if the Dolphins were to get a pick, let's say between 25 and 40, would it 25 and 35, would it be because they traded down or because they traded back up?
It's the Dolphins. They probably traded down, right? I just feel like, although now this Mike McDaniel era, they're all about trading and being ballsy. So I'm going to say trade down, but I don't know that I'm as confident in that. That's kind of like the Jeff Ireland way of thinking, right? Trade down and get this, okay defensive lineman when we could have got this elite safety, Earl Thomas. Pains me.
So you have Patrick Paul, you have Austin Jackson, you have your 2 starters, Teron Armstead still in the mix. That right there, Josh, seems like, can you really spend pick 13 on an offensive lineman? And I hear everybody who says no chance, like that doesn't make sense. But if you were to invest 13 on an offensive lineman, if you were to trade back up beginning of the 2nd, end of the 1st, what would your thoughts be about what the Dolphins are doing in the offensive line? Because all of a sudden, if they were to go down that route, it'd be like, oh, they're not messing around anymore. Like, this is a serious offensive line. And just that thought in itself seems kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think about how cool that is. And I remembered like we kind of felt that way about Liam Eichenberg, right? Like we're like, okay, they're moving up for right. I hate to bring him
How
up, but
dare you?
he's that exact guy. Like they moved up for him. We're like, okay, they saw a vision here and not went. So yeah, man, that would prove that they're truly ready to invest in this. And I think we'll probably see it early on in free agency. It sounds like they're gonna, do what they can to fix this thing. But yeah, I would love to see them get ballsy and realize that, they don't have much time, as we say, or at least I say every podcast we come on here.
Something I say almost every time we get onto this podcast. Cat was right. Josh, I don't think anybody had a better combine showing. Armand Membou, Missouri offensive lineman. Josh, we talk about taking that big swing. If you want to say that we're no longer messing with the offensive line, the athleticism he showed at the combine has just been absolutely insane. 6'3", 324 pounds. He'd not only provide Miami with a day one starter at guard, Josh, and where Zabel's being talked about as a center, like kind of swinging more and more inside. Membou is someone who I think is going to end up being able to swing back outside. So if you really want to get a stout plan where you have your starting guard, you have an offensive lineman, I think Membou could be your guy. But man, just reading Twitter, reading Blue Sky, whatever it may be, I mean, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, people were crying like, how dare we draft this guy this high? What's going on? Now we're hearing everyone saying that he might not make it out of the top 10.
It's funny how that works, right? And I even have that written down. Is 13 is even going to be available at 13? And I love how you give Cat a hat tip because he was talking and gushing over some of these offensive linemen. And correct me if I'm wrong, this was the one he compared to Laramie Tunsil, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So as soon as we heard that, I mean, it was goosebump city. Like you mentioned, he absolutely went crazy during the combine. And most importantly, this is a guy that, okay, yes, his home is at tackle, but he can move inside and he can play very well at guard. So the Dolphins could have that use for him, early on if they do invest a 13th pick. I know a lot of people say there's no chance in heck, and we've seen it before, right, from Mike McDaniel and Chris Greer, that maybe there is no chance they go offensive lineman here. But if they go based on the big board, there's a chance that Membou is the best available. And again, gotta tip your hat to Cat, who was all over that before the combine even started.
Another offensive lineman I want to bring out here. People actually started comparing Membou a bit to Teron Armstead too, just with like the athleticism. And I always think that's so interesting because I don't think like Teron Armstead, elite left tackle. A lot of people like will draft a speedy guy and say like it's the next Tyreek Hill, but people forget like Tyreek Hill was a 5th round pick. Teron Armstead was a 3rd round pick. So like these no brainer elite top tier athletes, like they weren't always that. So you don't want to like fall into the trap, Josh, where you just have these couple traits and say like it's instantly going to be this guy, because those still traits are available later in the draft. And someone that is starting to get on my radar a little bit, the Dolphins met with offensive lineman Charles Grant out of William and Mary, a consensus first team All-American. He allowed just 1 sack while starting 13 games at left tackle as a senior and only 2 sacks over 3 seasons for the Tribe. Bleacher Report's Brandon Thorne, who, I mean, dude, as long as we've been doing a podcast, I've seen Brandon Thorne's name. I can't say I could picture him or like point him out of a group of people. But he actually went out and compared him as Teron Armstead and listed him at 6'4", 300 pounds as a 3rd round pick, maybe a 2nd round pick if a team gets lucky. That's the type of player I think that the Dolphins are really going to want to try to hit their home run on. I think the more we see these meetings play out, we're going to talk about some premier first rounders soon, but you're going to have to hit on that 2nd round pick, man. We can't do another Cam Smith, no offense, but we cannot do this another time. So hearing someone like a Charles Grant has that versatility compared to Teron Armstead as a 2nd or a 3rd round pick, I mean, all that just seems like flat out music to my ears.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of forget how fast. I mean, you see the 40 going around. Teron Armstead still has like the fastest 40 time from left tackle. It's absolutely
3rd round
insane.
pick?
Yeah, that's absolutely nuts. Charles Grant, I mean, the biggest thing I would have, and, you always wonder with these small school guys is, how do they hold up against, some of the NFL talent? But it sounds like this guy, by all accounts, is the real deal. He's a wrestler in school. I looked up Lance Zierlein's scouting report just because, he knows a lot better than me. And he says he's a highly consistent performer with elite length and better technique than many prospects coming from a higher level. Grant played with both urgency and positioning in William and Mary's zone-heavy run scheme. So again, zone heavy fits the bill. Yeah. So definitely someone to keep an eye on. And Jake, as we're doing this, I have to tip my hat to you, man, because you did the top 10, you did the write-up for the Finsider. If you look up, who the Dolphins met with, the first article there is yours, Jake. And it's like AI is telling you like what the article says to answer the question. So just want to kind of give you a hat tip how the first one right there is just your list of the most of the players that we're talking about right now. So, dude, sign me up for Charles and Grant all day long.
I think as we do this, we got about a month until the draft. One of the conversations I want to have quite a bit isn't necessarily who the Dolphins will pick in the first round, Josh, but what position could it be likely where you see a fourth round rookie step up and become a starter? I think that can kind of tailor the conversation a little bit differently, where I look at safety. If you draft a third rounder, I think I could see them hit the ground starting and running as a rookie. I could see that happening at guard. I don't know if I see that at cornerback. I don't know if I see that at edge. I know these are real like umbrella biases, but I think this is kind of around the argument where people say like, we can't take a guard at 13. Like you can get a starting caliber guard in the second, third round. You still got to do your homework, and they're going to be those landmines. You mentioned one a little while ago. How dare you? But that I think is an argument I'm starting to agree with more and more. I mean, dude, I would love it. Like if the Dolphins drafted like Membou at 13 and then you have Teron Armstead coming back, I think you're just looking at this absolute offensive line and all the different things that we're not going to see until December or late in the season when the Dolphins desperately need to establish the run and all those fun cliches where I don't know, man. I don't know. I just think that my opinion on how the Dolphins are going to address the offensive line is slowly starting to change a little bit.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I think we're sitting here. You asked me like, where would I feel confident getting a starter? And it would be on the trenches on both sides almost. I know Kat mentioned the defensive line being so interior defensive line mostly. Being such a big unit, a unit that's filled with a bunch of potential talent throughout the draft. I mean, if you could hit on one of those guys that maybe could start, later on day 2 or even 3, I mean, it would go a long way. So I think I'm also starting to shift my focus. I think we were both like, let's just draft an offensive line. Let's just build this thing. But we keep seeing these great players that we know are going to probably be there at 13 that can like completely shift things. And it makes you okay, doing the free agency thing, the flex seal, and then, drafting a later guy.
Josh, like if you're going to flex seal a position and then maybe start a third or a second round pick, I look at Javon Holland. I look at Brandon Jones. I mean, can you really be okay taking Malaki Starks, who, dude, I don't want to be a hater. This dude is an absolute stud. He's commonly mocked to the Miami Dolphins at a Georgia, but I don't know if I could really stomach that at 13 when you can kind of think through the process of like, Deshaun Elliott's free agent caliber guy, like Brandon Jones, who I think was solid as a younger player, third round pick. Like you can make it work in different ways.
Yeah, you can. And I do want to know how much, we've heard, at least I saw some of the quotes going around the combine. I think Malaki Starks compared himself to Kyle Hamilton and kind of shaping his game around Hamilton. And we know how important Hamilton was, that Baltimore defense. So, if Anthony Weaver could sit here and say, this is my Kyle Hamilton, let's do what we can to draft him. But I don't know that he's that, again, I go back to Minkah Fitzpatrick. He was that guy. It was him and Derwin James. I remember loving Minkah Fitzpatrick. I don't know that I have that same love yet with Malaki Starks. And at the same time, I think this safety group is pretty good. I know the guy from South Carolina kind of stole the show at the combine. So there's other safeties out there where the Dolphins could go elsewhere. But Malaki Starks, the way he moved around in some of those position drills, I watched a little bit of it, the way he can move his hips and things like that, ran a 4.5 40. He looked fluid AF, but, I still go back to the tape, the Ole Miss game, the Alabama game, where I started watching those, and those were some of his, more poorly rated games, and you could kind of see where he didn't look like that elite player, that game changer that you might take at 13. So I'm saying all that. I'd love the pick. I'd find a way to talk myself into it, but I just feel like, again, with the safety position, what they might do in free agency, and just the way this class is this year, I think they might go elsewhere. And I do think Daniel Jeremiah had him ranked like 30th on this big board as well. So,
okay.
Yeah, so I mean it's beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? But I would be interested to see if the Dolphins take him at 13 because, again, right now, man, Patrick Morris is all we got.
He logged 52 tackles, 4 for a loss, and 4 passes defended as a first-team All-American. So, Josh, last year, the first safety taken in the draft, Tyler Nubin, went pick 47. Brian Branch, the first safety drafted in 2023, he went 45th overall to the Detroit Lions. I think Starks, no matter who picks him, you're going to say, okay, he's a starter, and you're not going to think about him again until he's practicing on the field. Like, he's going to be a very strong and good player. I just don't know. Like, when you see the contracts that safeties are getting, when you see that you can get somebody at 45 who can step in a rookie. I'm not saying that guy's going to be specifically available, but just that there's the potential of that. You just wonder, like, can we squeeze this out elsewhere? Josh, next player that met with the Dolphins, I'm going to butcher his name, and it's brutal because he played for the Hurricanes. Xavier Restrepo. I think I'm kind of close there. A wide receiver. The Miami Herald's Isaiah Smalls II reported that he met with the Dolphins. Not Mike McDaniel, though, but the special teams coordinator and a wide receivers coach as well, or the team's wide receivers coach, I should say. A high volume target for the Hurricanes. He caught 154 passes for 2,200 yards and 17 touchdowns over the last 2 seasons. Josh, I don't want to bury the lead. He didn't meet with Mike McDaniel. This isn't somebody the Dolphins are going to be spending a top 50, not even maybe a top 100 pick, but it kind of makes you laugh. And I added him in because Mike McDaniel is always going to look for his high volume, speedy, slot wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Mike McDaniel way, right? And I love how you wrote down Malik Washington because, I mean, that's kind of when you're going into this offseason, you kind of see him as that starting slot, right? So Restrepo, is that how, I don't know, I'll
feel so bad, dude. But he's a Hurricane.
Yeah, he's the leading Hurricanes all-time in receiving yards, 2,573. So I should know how to say his name, but I'm terrible in names. But it's just proof that the receiving corps is not done, right? They're going to go out there and look for people. And in this receiving class, I mean, a guy like that's already has proven that he can be that viable of a target, right? I mean, I think if a team drafts Cam Ward, ideally you would try to bring him in there and keep that marriage together. But the Dolphins have a need for a receiver, and I think I would much rather see him out there than, the corpse of Odell Beckham or whatever they were dragging out there last year. So I'm here for it, man.
Special teams coordinator and wide receiver coach. We saw how Malik Washington hit the seam in special teams. Obviously, I think Braxton Berrios is about to hit free agency. You wonder if they're going to bring him back. So this could be that scenario, Josh. And we're talking about realistic scenarios where you could see like people impacting the game their rookie season. A 6th-round wide receiver, we can see that happening and having an impact because it's happened before. It just happened last year with Malik Washington. Moving on. Josh, I think this is probably my favorite as of March 3rd for who I want the Dolphins to take at 13. The Dolphins did meet with cornerback Will Johnson. Not only would Chris Greer get some brownie points with Michigan man Stephen Ross, I genuinely think that he's one of the most unique prospects of this draft because of the injury. If he played the full season, if he wasn't dealing with turf toe, this is someone who already had 2 pick sixes, Josh, in his 6 games. If he falls to 13, I will run from Pittsfield, Massachusetts, all the way to wherever the draft is being held. It completely slipped my mind. I don't know how you can pass up this opportunity. A lockdown corner across from Jalen Ramsey, an instant starter, another player, man, where you select him, then you don't think about him again until week 1. Like, he's there, he's starting, and you got nothing to worry about.
Yeah, I think I keep going with the Tides. I think the other week you and I kind of were both in sync with Tyler Warren. I feel like the reason you would be okay, like the reason I'd run to the podium, just like you said, Will Johnson, is because he should not be there. And I think that's what's going to happen for the Dolphins. There's going to be a guy that falls directly into their lap. I mean, a lot of people think it could be Will Johnson based on how the board will go. And like you said, if this guy wasn't banged up, we'd be hearing his name up there with Travis Hunter, who, is arguably the best corner in the game. Some have him as a receiver. But if Will Johnson falls, I would run to the podium regardless of what the Dolphins do in free agency, because he is that, shutdown cornerback that, again, should not be there. And the brownie points you would get with Stephen Ross. I always joke that he loves his Michigan guys, but dude, a shutdown corner for Michigan that you could pair opposite Jalen Ramsey. You could keep Cater Kohu inside. I mean, I don't even think we know what their plan is yet with Cater Kohu. So adding him, I'd be here for that all day long.
Going back to the edge, I think one of the most infamous Mike McDaniel comments, Josh, was him kind of saying that if I could every year, I'd be drafting an edge rusher in the 1st round. A little tongue-in-cheek there, but the Dolphins did meet with Hurricanes edge rusher Tyler Barron. He transferred to Miami after 4 seasons at Tennessee. All ACC honorable mention, 11 tackles for a loss, 5.5 sacks in 13 games. This is another scenario, man, where I think that the story on this position group is yet to have a direction, right? I think whether you have Bradley Chubb or not, I think is going to change everything. But interesting prospect here, 4 stars coming out of high school, and really stood out at the combine as well.
Yeah, we know they love these local kids, right? You just talked about the receiver. Now you're talking about the edge from Miami. So a player that we know, like you said, Mike McDaniel had that quote. I actually have the quote here. By far, my favorite position is D line and edge. Like I think they can be the most impactful players on the field outside of quarterback because they dictate the terms the quarterback is able to play. You'd have to talk me out trying not to pitch Chris Greer to draft a defensive lineman or an edge every year. So they got Chop Robinson last year. I don't see why they, would be afraid of going edge this year because again, you look at the Super Bowl, you look at what they were able to do, whether it's an edge, whether it was on the defensive line. That Philadelphia Eagles front was absolutely game changing, and you want to try to replicate that. We hope Jalen Phillips is back to where he was at one point, but you can't truly rely on that, right? We don't know what's going on with Bradley Chubb, so I see a need here for edge, whether that's in the middle of the rounds, whether it's in the first round, like we can talk about in a second. But the Dolphins are absolutely going to build to that edge unit, and I'm intrigued by some of the prospects because there are a bunch of talented players in this class.
Top 10 performances in the 40-yard dash, the 10-yard split, the broad jump, and vertical jump. You do wonder if he's someone who can really crack that top 100, second, third round, something like that, where the Dolphins, like I said before, man, really got to hit a home run. However, you mentioned hometown guys playing in Miami. How about somebody who just flat out was born, raised in Miami, Shemar Stewart, Texas A&M edge? What sticks out to you other than the fact, Josh, that he's a big Jarvis Landry guy? I know that kind of just slides him up the draft board for you.
Well, yeah, that was the first thing I noticed. I feel like I had to put him in here when I saw that he was a Dolphins fan and things like that. But it was what he did. I mean, we all know the RAS scores going around there by Keith Platt. We see the little graphics. Dude was had a 9.99 out of 10 RAS score, ranked third out of 1,802 defensive ends from 1987. So my entire life, he's been 3 out of nearly 1,900 players. Ran a 4.59 40, 1.58 10-yard split and a 40-inch vertical. He was asked, what it would mean to him to play for the Dolphins. It'd mean a lot. My number one goal is for whatever team I go to is to have more wins this year than before. And Miami, I feel like we haven't been winning for a very long time. So to go back to the city and turn it around, I feel like that's a very big honor. He did say we. He was then asked if he was a fan, and that's when he said, Jarvis Landry, baby. So this guy is, not only is he might not even be available at 13 based on what he's been doing. I mean, that's saying a lot, but he's very versatile. This is a guy that's only going to get better. He only had 4.5 sacks throughout college. So you look at his production, the elite stuff that he's doing on the field and wondering why it didn't translate. But I mean, let's be honest, Chop Robinson was in a similar situation that a lot of fans got down on him for. So I want to see the finished product. And I wonder if the Dolphins don't view him as, one of those players that can truly change the game from the defensive side. But knowing that as a Dolphins fan, I absolutely had to write that up.
He only had 1.5 sacks last year?
Yeah. And in each of his 3 years, he had 1.5 sacks.
And he's being then there's a chance oh God, man, that's Lance Zierlein there. I mean, his last line here, just speaking boom or bust, dude, that's scary. That's scary. What would you rather do? Would you rather trade Bradley or cut Bradley Chubb, knowing that Stewart's going to be there and take that risk with your 13th overall pick, or keep Bradley Chubb and use the pick elsewhere?
Yeah, if we can figure out how to keep Chubb, I mean, I still feel like I want to see that Chubb Phillips, Chop Robinson thing. But yeah, man, it does say his card from granite though. I can't even say that word right. But I mean, boom or bust. I did see that, and it does make me think, of like the Charles Harrises and all those. Oh God, the players that came before.
God, man, that'd be so scary. 1.5 sacks,
Dolphins.
But I mean,
he's so Dolphins.
But I'd be with it. I mean, I wish he said Jay Cutler and Jarvis Landry, but it is what it is. Josh, one of the craziest scenes from the draft, from the combine. Did you see Gunnar Helm's ankle? This dude slipped during a drill, and all of a sudden he had the entire rainbow on his foot. It twisted it, bruised, and he continued to go out there. His numbers were kind of rough following it, Josh, and it's understandable why. But interesting to hear that he did meet with the Dolphins. This is someone who you're maybe thinking second, third round pick. Tight end's unique because you have someone like Jonnu Smith, right? He just set franchise receiving records at the tight end position. But I think it's pretty clear you can make a case that tight end is a position of need for this team.
Yeah, because we have to replicate that 8 yards that Durham Smythe was giving us, right? We definitely need an inline blocker, though, and I feel like no matter which one of these guys it is, whether I mean, dude, his ankle looked brutal. I mean, I used to skateboard, it looked like something, trying to a ledge and just coming right down on that. But whether it's, Helm, whether it's Mason Taylor, like we'll talk about, whether it's Tyler Warren, who the Dolphins also met with, the Dolphins are gonna bring in a tight end, and I'm looking forward to see what type of upgrade they can get at that position because we can joke until we're blue in the face, but 8 yards from Durham Smythe, it needs to get better than that.
Dude, 3 different times.
Jesus.
An 8-yard reception. That's so freaking bad, dude. That's so freaking I'm sorry. So Helm doesn't feature top end speed. He's not someone like Jonnu Smith who's going to take a screen or a bubble screen and just take it the distance. But his 6'5" frame is something that this offense is desperately missing. Had just 19 receptions for 236 yards across his first 3 seasons before breaking out in 2024. Led the team with 60 receptions, 786 receiving yards, and 7 touchdowns. A solid blocker. Man, this seems like that ideal scenario. If you can get like a Will Johnson in the first round, Gunnar Helm there in the second, third, even if you got to trade up a little bit, you're feeling a little comfortable about not only having Jonnu Smith, but somebody that can do a little blocking.
And that's really what we want, right? I mean, if we need that guy that can block consistently, but then go a little bit above and beyond what we saw from the previous from Smythe previously. So
I really want the Dolphins to draft Mason Taylor. We've seen it most recently with the Steelers and Joey Porter Jr. Josh, if you recognize a last name and that last name had such an impact on your franchise, I think you should just try it, man. Mason Taylor, big body, obviously, because he is the son of Jason Taylor, 6'4". Everybody loves that he has absolute soft hands. He's a very fluid pass catcher. But the only issue, the gripe, Josh, it would be kind of like another Jonnu Smith when we know that if he's going to be here for a couple of years, you want someone that's a little more established as a blocker. And I don't want to be a hater here because I think that only drafting Mason Taylor, being a Dolphins fan, no way this is going to backfire, could only be a good thing.
yeah, I mean, we all want the Dolphins to draft these guys. I mean, it definitely makes you feel old as hell. The fact that Mason Taylor, the son of Jason Taylor, is coming out, he's playing tight end. But you would love to have him come to Miami. I do think he looked decent on the on-field work. Using the blocking shed. I don't remember if it was a clip I saw, but they said they might get the blocking shed like CTE or something. So you saw him doing the drills out there. He was running. He looked, like you mentioned, more like a big, I don't want to say glorified slot wide receiver because that's very rude to say, and that's Mike Gesicki's role. But he's that bigger guy, that big body, that guy that moves a lot bigger than you would expect from a tight end. So I would love to see him get added to this offense. I'd love for the Dolphins to find a way to draft him. But I believe it was Wingfield said this might be his number 2 tight end in the entire draft. So I don't know if he'll even be there when the Dolphins, if say you don't get him in, well, you're not going to get him around day 2. I mean, there's going to be some guys going after Mason Taylor, especially with that impressive combine he had. And yeah, because he's also Jason Taylor's son.
Bleacher Report's Dane Parson kind of penciled him in as a 3rd-round pick currently, but Josh, this stuff's going to move so much, and it's going to that's the thing about the mock drafts. Them kids in their mock drafts, like there are going to be runs and there are going to be teams that are feeling uncomfortable and there are going to be teams that reach. So it's always it's interesting to keep and important to keep in mind. Like you pencil someone in as a 4th-round pick, that still means they can go anywhere from the 2nd to the 7th. It's still March 3rd. There's a lot to figure out here. But you do see the vision. And Josh, how do you feel about in general? We got 3. Gunnar Helm, Mason Taylor, and you mentioned him. The Dolphins met with Tyler Warren as well. The Dolphins are doing their research. That's 3 tight ends right there. How does that make you feel?
It makes me feel good that they're going to, find, a nice replacement from Durham Smythe. But I'm just, deep down in my heart, right, we're a little bit confused. We kind of want Tyler Warren, the unicorn. You know what he's capable of. Imagine adding him to this offense. But then part of you wants Mason Taylor as well. And, there's other guys that we haven't even talked about. But the fact the Dolphins are meeting with these guys, they're doing their due diligence. They're going to bring in a tight end, and we should be excited about it.
I still love the idea of Tyler Warren, and maybe we should do a list instead. Players we'd get mad about at 13, like Tyler Booker instantly comes to mind. I think he's a great prospect. Could see him in the 2nd round. I don't even think he met with the Dolphins. I think that at 13 is one that instantly sticks out, and sorry to kind of throw shade at him. But I mean, Tyler Warren, man, just those. I go back to the stats, just the 40 snaps at quarterback, the ability to do the tush push. And I think when you think about a specific roster and the team needs, if we want to break free from the Chris Greer of let's just be as a baseline like mediocre at every position and then try to build from there. If you really want to try to push all the chips here and like this offense is missing that inline blocker, just that guy in the middle who can move you forward for a couple yards, because obviously you don't want Jeff Wilson to do it for some reason. Tyler Warren makes so much sense, man. And I don't want to talk out of both sides of my mouth because I still think Will Johnson's my 1A, but I mean, I'm not going to be mad at a Warren pick at 13 if he's there.
Yeah, I don't know that there's too many people I'd be upset with. I mean, even the offensive line, you and I have kind of, understood why they would take that pick. For me, I think it's safe for us to just say we'll go Will Johnson will be our defensive guy, and we can have Tyler Warren as our offensive, pipe dream in the perfect scenario. Because, like you mentioned, man, he can play in line. He'd be able to move those guys, and that's just game changing for this offense in general. We mentioned Tyler Warren. That's probably our 12, but there's one other guy I want to mention, Jake, and I'd written down here. We talked about quarterbacks. You asked me who I wanted on the last pod. I think I said Jalen Milroe, which I don't know if you saw it, but at the combine, his hands like grew in almost like an inch. It was something crazy. Like his hands grew like Charlie's uncle, the warrior. Yeah, or like Charlie's uncle with his big old hands. Gosh. But they met with Dillon Gabriel, and I just want to bring that up because this guy, again, is left-handed, Hawaiian-born. A lot of his game is similar to Tua Tagovailoa we talked about on the last podcast. 3,857 yards last year for Oregon, 30 touchdowns. I believe he was part of the, he's chasing the Heisman. He's played at UCF, Oklahoma, and Oregon, so he has experience. He's kind of more of a veteran, 24 years old. But the Dolphins met with him at the combine, and he was asked, and this is a shout-out to Sports Illustrated, Alan Popar or whatever his name. Shout out to him for getting this quote. "I've had the most experience ever, as you can imagine, starting in high school as a freshman all the way into my senior year in varsity, and then everything throughout college." He says that his leadership ability and his ability to go out there and just be a winner. I've won all three spots, and I've done it in the big games and everything in between. And he's willing to learn. So, I mean, this is a guy who he's 24 years old. He's been able to go from one place to another, started throughout his entire career, whether it's UCF, whether it's when he transferred to Oklahoma, when he transferred to Oregon. The game never seemed too big for him. And when the Dolphins, when they're looking at that backup quarterback to be Tua's, clipboard holder, to go out there and maybe win a game, I feel like Dillon Gabriel, as much as I was joking previously, I'm starting to lean up to that based on, the left-handed thing's okay, but just his traits and how similar they might be to Tua Tagovailoa and what he can do in this Miami Dolphins offense. So the fact that they're reaching out to some of these, I don't want to say high. He's a mid-round prospect, but the fact that they're going out there and trying to find a backup quarterback in the draft, it says that might be where they're going instead of free agency, like I admittedly thought that would be their number one go-to.
I think the idea of the emergency quarterback has changed so much where I think you can have a little bit of a farm system with a third quarterback, a developmental quarterback. And God, I think this would be a great pick for the Dolphins. And I think one of the biggest issues of the Mike McDaniel era was there wasn't a quarterback dart every single year. If you knew that, like, hey, we have things like Skylar Thompson did all this running in college and we're not going to run him, maybe we should try drafting somebody else. Like, those are things that you kind of would hope you'd be talking about. So Josh, 3 7th-round picks. I'm not going to make it that easy for you. The Dolphins have picked 156 from Denver and from the Bradley Chubb trade. That's still a thing. And they also have their own 5th-round pick that's also very close. So yeah, 156 and 151. Either of those, you're pretty content with, Gabriel. That makes a lot of sense.
If he's there, I mean, I don't know if you saw Will Howard was another one of those older, quarterbacks that had success last year with Ohio State. He was skipping rocks all over the field. So I don't know where these teams will rank Dillon Gabriel amongst, this class. But, dude, I'm willing to throw a 5th-round pick dart at a quarterback, whether it's Gabriel, whether, even Will Howard skipping rocks, and then next year do the same thing. Because like you said, man, it's not even so much a Mike McDaniel thing. Brandon Doughty was the only person they brought in for Ryan Tannehill. So you need to just keep throwing a dart. You need to hope that there's someone there that, we see it every year, the Brock Purdy's, that, that quarterback that shouldn't be mentioned among the elite, working their way up from, being little known or even nothing, late round pick or whatever it is. So throw a dart, man. 5th-round pick. I'm all for that.
So 151. How about 135? It's a 4th-round compensatory pick. Would you use that on Gabriel?
Oh, man. On Gabriel specifically?
Sure. I'd argue it's like a 5th-round pick. If you have a compensatory pick in the 4th, I want to condition our brains to think of those as 5th round because they are at the end of the round.
Yeah,
we can't.
They are 5th. Yeah, no, that works for me. Yeah, thank you for Yeah, fourth, fifth. Yeah, I'm good with either of those because, again, if you're drafting him, you think he's at least capable of going in there. He, to me, feels almost like a Marcus Mariota. No disrespect to Marcus Mariota, but like, I don't know. And he can do the mobile. He does have mobility to him too, so he can scramble a little bit. Where
Marcus
two of 'em
Mariota
can't.
was a first round pick. So if I was to say that you needed to
Oh
use
god.
115, your fourth rounder, would you still do it? 20
Oh
picks higher
man.
than the comp pick?
I'm gonna regret that more. I meant like modern day Marcus Mariota. Yeah, I would. I mean, I guess if it doesn't have to necessarily be Gabriel. I am not sure that he's the apple of my eye as far as that backup guy, but I feel like the Dolphins need to bring in a legit quarterback that they can at least maybe groom for this season if they're here the entirety.
Would you use your third round pick, 98 overall, your comp pick on a backup quarterback?
See, that's like Jalen Milroe. If he was there, I probably would. I do like Jalen Milroe. He's the one that like we're getting closer now. Where if he were, because I even thought like before I saw like some of those bad throws that he made at the Senior Bowl, I almost thought that maybe I would take him in the second round, Jalen Milroe, because I thought he has some of that Justin Fields-esque type stuff to him. So he would be the only one. But you're going to keep making me go up there until we're talking Jackson Dart at 13, aren't you?
Who would you want if you're taking? Let's say you get spicy and you take Milroe in the second round, 48 overall. Who would you need the Dolphins to take at 13? Like who would need for that to be a draft you're happy with? I'm not trying to just call you. I'm genuinely curious here. I'm trying to put your feet to the fire and see what type of draft this would look like.
Without seeing the free, I mean, I was going to say Will Johnson. I mean, can I go with Will Johnson? Then we go what? Jalen Milroe in the second sounds a little too rich. The third sounded nice, but I don't know if he'll be there. So that's where I'd go. Will Johnson. Ideally, you still get a guard, and then maybe you could get Jalen Milroe. But yeah, I don't know, man. Jalen Milroe would definitely handicap you a little bit. And some team's going to overreach for him. I really do think someone's going to, they're going to do something crazy and draft Jalen Milroe higher than he maybe should be.
Do you have any Jalen Milroe in the third or Gabriel with your fifth round pick from Denver, so 156?
I mean, probably Gabriel if I'm doing what's best for the team. I just have like a little bit soft spot in my heart for Jalen Milroe, even though he looked like Dookie the last time he was out there.
Why do you like him?
The mobility, and I was watching him versus it was Malaki Starks. That was that Alabama game, and he made some goofy throws that like there was a sideline throw that didn't even look like it had a chance that he fit through two guys. There was a scramble he had where Malaki Starks was one-on-one with him, and he made him look goofy in the middle of the field. But then the rest of the season, he kind of like drifted off and kind of looked like a very, very raw prospect who some have even said maybe he has to change positions. So maybe I shouldn't be staking my claim on Jalen Milroe, but I'm going to do it. I did it already, so it can't be taken back.
No ice heavy on the YOLO. I like it. That is it. 13 prospects. We're going to go 12 and a half because we kind of sprinkled Ward in there just because we've talked about him so much. There wasn't really a lot to add to that. But that is it. We got to add another disclaimer, man. The Dolphins aren't going to draft all these guys. If we can have a victory lap if the Dolphins draft two of these guys. I just think it's a fun thought process, thought exercise even, to kind of look at what the Dolphins are focused on. I think it's very interesting the amount of tight ends they're looking at all throughout the draft, seeing that as urgency for them because, I mean, Mike McDaniel met with the media last week. We did a podcast on it. We haven't heard from Chris Greer, so we got to be pigeons and breadcrumbs, man. We got to put this picture together ourselves, and that's what we're going to continue to do. However, since it's the off season, our scheduling, our posts get a little more infrequent. I wouldn't even say infrequent. The inconsistency is just because you don't have games. So the best way to know when a new podcast is coming out is to make sure you subscribe to the show, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Want to send us some comments? You want to yell at us? AnotherDolphinsPodcast@gmail.com, or you can watch the show on YouTube, the 560 WQAM YouTube channel. We're going to have O-line expert Eric Smith joining us later in the week to go through some of the premier free agent offensive linemen and if they are actually fits for the Miami Dolphins. So you will not have to miss that. But until then, the sun is shining, the weather is getting nicer, and most importantly, fins up.
Fins up.
Fins up.